when the youngest female tech CEO in America was handed the largest personal fine in SEC history. She didn't flinch. What happened inside that federal courtroom didn't just change one woman's life, it shook the system. The Alexandria Federal Courthouse had never felt heavier. It wasn't just the press lining King Street, the security checkpoints, or the Wall Street analysts packed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. It was something deeper, tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then the gavel fell. Judge Anthony Trenga announced, his voice ringing with finality. This court finds the defendant, Miss Karoline Levitt, liable for civil securities fraud under Section 10B and Rule 10B-5. The penalty shall be $600 million, paid in full. Within 30 days, gasps filled the room. One reporter whispered, "Did he say 600? Karoline didn't move, no flicker, no recoil. The cameras captured her sitting perfectly still at the defendant's table, shoulders squared, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the bench. She didn't blink or react, she just listened. To most Americans, Karoline Levitt was more than just the 33-year-old founder of Heartfelt Technologies. She was a cultural force, once dubbed the tech world's youngest truth teller by Forbes, and a former national energy advisor who walked away from D.C. to build something that mattered. Heartfelt had promised to revolutionize the clean energy race with its flagship innovation, the PhotoFlux 7X, a solar thermal microreactor that allegedly exceeded efficiency benchmarks by 40%. In a live-streamed investor update, Karoline claimed the system was already deployed and operational at the company's South Lake, Texas facility. That statement alone sent Heartfelt stock soaring 37% over the following 48 hours, attracting billions in new capital from hedge funds and pension boards. But behind the excitement, the Securities and Exchange Commission was quietly building its case. According to internal reports, Heartfelt's production facility was still undergoing regulatory review. Technical setbacks, licensing delays, and a missing coolant calibration system meant the plant was months, if not a full year, away from full deployment. The SEC called it a textbook case of market manipulation. Karoline's defense insisted her statements were based on verified data pre-approved by engineers and board members, but the commission was relentless. Led by Chief Counsel Melissa Hartman, the SEC accused Karoline of weaponizing public trust to artificially inflate market confidence. Judge Trenga, known in federal circles for his precision and intolerance of courtroom theatrics, delivered what legal analysts were already calling the largest individual SEC penalty ever issued. Without a criminal conviction, he leaned forward slightly, addressing Karoline directly. What this court finds especially egregious is not simply the magnitude of the misinformation, but the arrogance with which it was delivered. He criticized her for arriving late to pretrial proceedings, deflecting accountability on public platforms, and maintaining a posture of executive exceptionalism. There are no separate roles for the powerful, he declared. This court will not become the venue for performance-based justice. The room went quiet again. Journalists lowered their cameras, reporters stared over their laptops, and even the SEC attorney stopped smiling. All eyes returned to Karoline, still unmoved. There was something chilling about her composure, not defiant, but as if she were absorbing something seismic and saying nothing. Her dark slate suit was simple, her hair pulled into a clean knot. No jewelry, no phone, no notes, just a single folder tucked inside her briefcase. As bailiffs began clearing the gallery and Judge Trenga rose from the bench, the noise in the room finally began to rise, whispers, rustling papers, phones being pulled out as reporters scrambled to post the ruling in real time. Melissa Hartman turned to shake hands with her team. Nodding curtly, she had done it. She had taken down the face of next-gen energy on live television. But Karoline's attorney, Jacob Klein, didn't stand. He sat beside her, murmuring quietly. She nodded just once, no emotion, no panic, no sign that she had just been handed a penalty that would financially devastate almost any founder in America. Outside, camera crews reported that the SEC's landmark win would likely trigger ripple effects across the industry. Several tech CEOs were reportedly preparing emergency legal reviews of their own investor statements. But back inside, a different story was still unfolding. Karoline finally reached into her briefcase. Not rushed, not for show, she placed a folded document on the table, urgently and deliberately. Then she looked at Klein and whispered 3 words. "Let's begin now. Not let's appeal. Not this isn't fair. Not even they're wrong. Just let's begin now." What happened next would upend everything. But in that moment, before the truth surfaced, before the courtroom turned, before the public reckoning. Karoline Levitt did something few had seen her do in years. She waited, and the world leaned in. For someone who once dominated headlines, who used to live stream product launches from server rooms and tweet engineering breakthroughs in real time, her silence was deafening. The day after the ruling, her official accounts went dark. No statements, no denials, no spin. A single pinned message remained across all her platforms. The truth is patient. So am I. The financial world interpreted that silence in two ways. Some saw it as surrender, the fall of a tech icon who, for all her charisma and innovation, had finally been outmatched by the law. Others, especially those who'd followed Karoline since her early days at the Department of Energy, saw something else: preparation. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the SEC held its quiet celebration. Melissa Hartman, flanked by her team, walked briskly out of the courthouse that morning, ignoring the swarm of reporters begging for sound bites. Later that day, a leaked internal memo from SEC Director Tom Asbury called the verdict a pivotal moment in restoring regulatory order, and praised Hartman for delivering what he called a benchmark achievement in accountability. By Friday, the Wall Street Standard ran a headline: SEC takes down tech darling, a new era of oversight begins. But back inside the legal war room in Alexandria, Karoline's team wasn't packing up, they were reorganizing. Attorney Jacob Klein stood over a table littered with trial transcripts, timelines, and flagged email printouts. Known for his composure, even he seemed more intense now, less professor, more strategist. This isn't about reversing the judgment, he told his team. It's about correcting the record. On Monday morning, they filed a sealed motion with the court, requesting an evidentiary supplement. Judge Trenga didn't flinch. I've issued a final ruling, he said plainly. The evidentiary window has closed. The time for presentation is over. But Klein didn't sit down. Your Honor, he said carefully, the material in question was not available to the defense during discovery. We have reason to believe it was intentionally withheld by the commission. That statement cracked the room open like lightning. Hartman stood immediately. Objection. That is a serious accusation without foundation. Klein replied coolly, I'm not accusing. I'm requesting acknowledgement that we received key internal SEC communications documents that only surfaced last Thursday night. Trenga narrowed his eyes. From whom? Klein responded, a confidential whistleblower. We have verified the chain of custody. The metadata confirms the documents originated from SEC internal servers, accessed from within the Office of Legal Review. Hartman crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. Klein continued, Your Honor, we don't seek to undermine this court's authority. What we seek is a full and fair proceeding. These documents contain direct contradictions between what the commission stated publicly and what their own analysts privately concluded. Karoline remained seated, watching silently, her fingers gently tapping the edge of a document she brought with her since day one. Judge Trenga leaned back in his chair. You understand the gravity of what you're implying, Mr. Klein? Klein replied, I do, Your Honor, but I'm not implying. I'm stating on the record. Hartman was already preparing to speak again, but Trenga raised a hand. Not yet. He turned toward Karoline. Miss Levitt, do you have anything you wish to say for a moment? She didn't answer. Then she stood, her voice steady and low, every word carrying. I don't want revenge. I don't need vindication in the press. I just want the full story heard. She held up a document. This is one of them. It's a copy of an internal SEC review conducted 3 weeks before I was charged. The conclusion from their own senior technical advisor reads, Heliodine Southlake metrics are consistent with public claims. There is no evidence of systemic misrepresentation. A long pause followed. I didn't come here to fight an agency, Karoline said. I came here to finish a story that never got told. Trenga stared at her, a long, unreadable silence passing. Then he announced, This court will recess for 45 minutes. I will review the materials privately. Upon return, we will determine whether these claims warrant a procedural reevaluation. He stood, gavelled once, and left the bench. The room exploded. Reporters, who had been halfway out the door, rushed back in. Court officers tried to restore order, but the energy was electric. What had seemed like the final chapter was suddenly a live fuse. Klein leaned toward Karoline, his voice low. Are you sure about this? She nodded. I'm not afraid of what they find. I'm afraid of what they hide. He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, then smiled just. Barely in the hallway outside the courtroom, SEC counsel Melissa Hartman was already on the phone. "No," she said sharply, "she's bluffing. The documents are probably fake. We'll challenge the chain. Yes, I'll handle it." But even she didn't sound convinced. Back inside, Karoline sat alone at the defendant's table once more, this time not as a symbol of shame, but as a question mark hanging over the entire legal process. For the first time all week, she reached for her phone not to post, but to scroll. The headlines were already shifting. Levitt may have new evidence. SEC whistleblower emerges in landmark trial. Judge Trenga orders emergency recess in Heliodine case. And on social media, a new hashtag had begun to trend. Hashtag let her speak. Karoline locked her phone and took a long, measured breath. Outside, the world was guessing what would happen next, but inside, she already knew. When Judge Trenga returned to the bench, the energy in the courtroom shifted again, this time not with shock, but with anticipation. Something was about to break. He moved slowly, deliberately, his face giving nothing away. But the room could feel the weight he now carried. "I have reviewed the documents submitted by the defense," he said calmly, "and I find them troubling." No one moved. These materials include internal SEC communications that, on their face, appear to directly contradict the central arguments made by the commission throughout this trial. Hartman tensed visibly. He continued, "They include a dated email from the lead prosecuting attorney, Melissa Hartman, to her supervisory team, stating, and I quote, though our technical analysts have determined Ms. Levitt's public claims are consistent with the engineering data provided, we must proceed with the enforcement action. The deterrent value alone justifies moving forward." Gasps echoed across the room. Some reporters dropped their pens. Trenga didn't stop. There is also a transcript and accompanying audio recording submitted under seal, but reviewed by this court from an internal strategy call within the SEC's Office of Enforcement. He looked up now, locking eyes with Hartman. In this recording, a supervisory official states, quote, "If this gets out, the case falls apart overnight. So make sure those files stay buried." He leaned back. "This is not evidence of carelessness. This is evidence of intentional concealment." Melissa Hartman stood immediately. "Your Honor, you will sit down." Trenga snapped. Sharper than before, the room froze. Hartman's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she lowered herself slowly back into her seat. Trenga turned toward his clerk. "Mark this as an evidentiary override. We will reopen this proceeding." He then faced Karoline, whose expression hadn't changed not even once. "This court vacates the prior civil penalty of $600 million issued against Ms. Karoline Levitt." The room erupted, but Trenga wasn't done. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility for immediate review." The collapse of the sex case against Karoline Levitt revealed substantial procedural misconduct. Within the Securities and Exchange Commission, the courtroom, once silent, erupted into chaos as reporters scrambled to rewrite headlines and cameras turned back on. Every major financial feed on the East Coast broke into live coverage of what was now being called the biggest legal reversal in modern regulatory history. Karoline Levitt, accused of fraud, sat calmly, as though she had been here before. Judge Trenga's voice softened as he addressed the court, emphasizing the importance of oversight and regulation, but condemning the distortion of truth and the weaponization of the legal process. He closed the file in front of him with quiet finality, declaring that fairness had not been served. The gavel came down, and the case of SEC versus Karoline Levitt collapsed. The silence that followed was charged, alive. Every person in the courtroom, witnesses, attorneys, students, and interns understood they had just witnessed something rare, not just a shift in legal outcome, but in public narrative. Melissa Hartman, the SEC's lead attorney, remained frozen, her hands clenched around her legal pad. Outside the courthouse, steps were already packed with press crews and protesters, now joined by free speech advocates and tech supporters carrying hastily printed signs. Inside, Jacob Klein, Karoline's attorney, stood slowly, nodding in subtle affirmation of the months of sleepless preparation. Karoline rose and walked with Jacob toward the rear of the room as murmurs filled the air. Someone in the crowd stood and clapped, followed by another, and soon the entire gallery, press, public, and even junior SEC staff were on their feet, not in celebration, but in recognition of restraint and principle. Karoline didn't wave or smile. She simply walked out. In the corridor, Jacob suggested holding a press conference to shape the narrative, but Karoline shook her head. "Let them talk first," she said quietly. "I want them to ask why. Why I never fought back until now." Back in the courtroom, Judge Trenga remained seated, alone for a moment. He looked down at the bench, the grooves in the wood, the notes he hadn't needed, then slowly removed his glasses. It was a moment of silence for a system that, despite its flaws, had just proven it could still correct itself. He instructed his clerk to schedule a hearing with DOJ oversight, signaling the start of an investigation into the sex conduct. The ruling was vacated. The courtroom erupted, and reporters scrambled to rewrite headlines. The SEC team was visibly shaken, and whispers of a federal investigation were already surfacing. But Karoline Leavitt hadn't spoken. Not really. Then, as the last few gallery members gathered their belongings, she rose to her feet and asked softly, "Your Honor, may I address the court?" Her voice was calm, almost too calm for a woman whose $600 million penalty had just been wiped from the record. Judge Trenga granted her permission, and the courtroom fell silent. Karoline stepped forward and spoke without notes or script. She began by reflecting on her younger self, a 28-year-old standing on a stage in D.C., telling a room full of scientists that transparency was a technical issue. She admitted she had been wrong. Transparency, she said, isn't just technical, it's moral, a choice, and sometimes a very costly one. She founded Heliodine because she believed in building something cleaner, faster, and better. But somewhere along the way, she stopped realizing that how they communicated was just as important as what they built. She took responsibility for her words and actions, addressing the SEC table directly, expressing her belief in their mission and her hope that they could both do better going forward. The courtroom was dead quiet as Karoline concluded her statement. She returned her focus to Judge Trenga, saying, "We don't get to choose the moments that define us, but we do get to choose who we become because of them." She had chosen to learn, to slow down, to lead with clarity rather than charisma. Judge Trenga, known for his unshakable composure, acknowledged her words, emphasizing that justice is not about punishment or performance, but about truth. The gallery stood, not in awe of Karoline or fear of Trenga, but in quiet reverence for what had just happened. The system had been challenged and corrected itself not with rage or revenge, but with evidence, courage, and one woman's decision to speak only when it truly mattered. In the days that followed, headlines shifted from courtroom drama to national reckoning. The Department of Justice launched an official investigation into the sex conduct in the Leavitt case. Within 72 hours, Melissa Hartman was placed on administrative leave, and 3 senior managers from the Sex Enforcement Division were suspended. The commission acknowledged the serious nature of the judicial findings and vowed full cooperation with the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility. For Karoline, the story wasn't about punishment, but recovery. She disappeared from the public eye for nearly a month, then quietly returned to the stage at the Mid-Women in Tech Summit. Her speech wasn't a comeback, but a reflection on failure, responsibility, and humility. She spoke not about technology or lawsuits, but about communication and earning trust every day. Across social media, clips from Karoline's speech spread, quietly shared with captions like, "This is how you lead after you fall." Even critics acknowledged the tone shift, with one columnist writing, "She didn't rebrand, she recalibrated." Meanwhile, Judge Trenga announced his retirement from the federal bench, delivering a final reflection at Georgetown Law School. He emphasized that no agency, company, court, or judge is above scrutiny. Within 6 months, law schools across the country began integrating the Leavitt case into ethics curricula, alongside Watergate and Enron. Unlike those stories, however, this one didn't end in destruction, but in course correction. The SEC implemented new procedural safeguards, and a new Office of Evidence Integrity was formed. Karoline returned to Heliodine, but not as CEO. Instead, she assumed the role of Chief Strategy and Ethics Officer, tasked with ensuring the company remembered what had happened and why it mattered. In a rare interview, she summed it up in one sentence: "We don't need perfect leaders, we need honest ones." The final image of her story wasn't captured in a courtroom or during a speech, but as she stepped off the stage at MIT, a student handed her a handwritten note card. "Thank you for not giving up." Karoline smiled, folded the card, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. walking away no longer the CEO accused of fraud, but the woman who stood when others expected her to fold. In the end, this wasn't just about a courtroom reversal. It was about what happens when truth is tested and still rises. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to not miss out on top-tier analyzers of politics. And just to see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring showdowns that change how the world sees.